The man who had been by my side for 10 years ended up giving his heart to my younger sister. My mother, who had long passed away, was brought back to hurt me once more, because he had the audacity to bring to our wedding a woman who looked exactly like my sister. He looked at me coldly and said, "If you want to be a daughter-in-law of the Parker family, learn to keep quiet. If you can't, call off the wedding." I looked straight into his eyes and, without hesitation, declared the engagement over. But when I walked down the aisle with another man, he was the one who lost control. His eyes turned red, his voice hoarse with anger. "Why? How could you marry someone who isn't me?" I curled my lips into a faint but firm smile and replied softly, "You want to be Mr. Parker? You've never even been worthy of that title." When Ethan Parker showed up at my wedding, holding the hand of a woman who looked exactly like my sister, Lily Moore, I felt as if someone had slapped me hard across the face, right into my pride. In that instant, I understood everything. All his previous apologies, all his efforts to reconcile and restore our engagement, they were nothing but a prelude to the humiliation I was now being forced to endure. But I couldn't afford to lose control. The Sterling Corporation's strategic project was at a decisive stage. Not only were family members from both sides present, but also major business partners and investors who had placed their trust and expectations in me. I had no choice but to take a deep breath, steady my emotions, and keep my expression calm, despite the countless scrutinizing eyes around us. Before Ethan could do something outrageous, I forced a small smile, turned to my assistant, and said quietly, "They're already here, so treat them as guests. Find her a seat." At the same time, I sent Ethan a sharp warning glance, a silent message not to go too far. But he only smirked, laughed mockingly, and without bothering to hide it, held the woman's hand tighter. His voice was loud and clear, deliberately for everyone to hear. "Nina, I brought her here today just to tell you that Lily is the one I've chosen. If you still want to marry into the Parker family, you'd better learn to endure it. Otherwise, this wedding doesn't need to continue." Just one look into his eyes, and I saw the threat behind them. The Sterling Corporation I had rebuilt from the ruins my father left behind was like a building without a proper foundation. Though I had worked tirelessly to revive it over the years, in truth, it was still balancing on a thin, fragile rope. This project was a life-or-death gamble for the company. My marriage to Ethan Parker wasn't merely personal. It was a crucial leverage point for Sterling's survival. He believed I wouldn't dare to break the deal. But looking at him now, my heart went cold. So this was what people called mutual understanding, something that only left disgust in the end. I clenched my hand, my thumb brushing unconsciously against the ring on my middle finger, the one he had given me when he confessed his love. Finally, I steadied myself and asked, "Ethan, are you sure this is what you want?" He didn't hesitate. His tone was calm, indifferent. "We owe this to Lily, Nina." I froze. "What did you just say?" My voice trembled as emotions surged uncontrollably. The Parker family had long been a pit of internal strife. Ethan's parents had been ruined by his uncle when he was young. Out of loyalty and gratitude to Ethan's late mother, my mother had taken him in, raising and protecting him through the chaos. He had personally witnessed how Lily's mother and my father drove my mother insane, locking her away in a mental hospital until she died in agony. He was also the one who had seen me living all alone in the house that once belonged to my mother, enduring humiliation and disdain just to survive. When my mother passed away, he had no choice but to return to the Parker family, living under the oppression of his second uncle. At that time, he held my hand tightly and swore, "Nina, don't be afraid of the people who hurt us. I'll make sure they pay for everything." And yet now, he dared to say that all of this was our debt, that we owed Lily. A surge of fury exploded in my chest, nearly choking me. I tore off the veil from my head and said coldly, "Ethan Parker, if you've gone insane, then fall into that madness alone. Don't drag me into it." That year, my father had used the Sterling family's money to support another woman and their illegitimate child. From the moment Lily Moore was born, she lived off wealth that rightfully belonged to me. Every penny she spent came from my family's assets. Everything she owned, every single thing, was taken from the Sterlings, soaked with the blood and tears of my mother and me. What do I owe her exactly? Ethan's tone dropped lower, losing the gentle warmth it once had. Lily's dead, Nina. Don't you feel even a little remorse? Do you even have a heart? I kept my expression indifferent and replied calmly. I never wished for her to die, but if she hadn't obsessed over things that weren't hers, would she have needed to end her life? Ethan's eyes turned red, his voice thick with grief and accusation. I froze. So, in his heart, all along, he had blamed me for Lily Moore's death. Lily's love for Ethan had never been a secret. Even though he never once returned her feelings, she never stopped sacrificing for him. That year, Ethan's uncle had been cornered by him, and in a desperate attempt, drove his car straight toward Ethan, planning to die together. In that split second between life and death, it was Lily who threw herself in front of the car, pushing Ethan out of the way and saving his life. She, however, was hit severely and had to have one leg amputated to survive. Right before her surgery, the doctors discovered she had late-stage lung cancer. At that time, I had already sent my father to prison. Lily's mother, Mrs. Helen Zhao, the very woman who had locked my mother in a mental hospital, had also been placed there under my orders. Lily had begged Ethan to take her to see me, hoping that, because she was dying, I might spare her mother. I refused. The next day, she killed herself. In her suicide note, she wrote that she only wished to use her death to atone for her mother's sins. I looked straight into Ethan's eyes, but could no longer find the man who had once stood by me through the darkest days. The look in his eyes now was the same as when he had held Lily's body, filled with hatred, cold, and utterly unfamiliar. It was in that moment I finally understood. He had begun to hate me from that day on. A hollow, freezing emptiness rose within me, swallowing every trace of feeling, just like the day I watched my mother lose her mind and leap from the rooftop. No one able to stop her. I knew then that the boy who had once walked with me through the shadows no longer existed. My voice came out icy and distant. Why should I forgive the people who drove my mother to her death? Why should I feel guilty for the daughter of my enemy who chose to die? That year, it was Helen Zhao and my father who had destroyed my mother's life, and mine along with it. If it hadn't been for my grandfather's will, which strictly stated that the Sterling estate would only be transferred to me when I turned 20, and that if I died before then, all the assets would be donated to charity, I might not have survived to adulthood. Even so, just because Lily had loved Ethan Parker, I had to live under mockery and scorn, both at home and at school. Ethan had seen the countless scars on my body many times before. He had once sworn that he would fight to bring me justice. Yet now, he stood before me and said coldly, "Nina, you've become impossible to understand. When did you turn into someone this cruel?" I let out a faint laugh, took off the ring I had worn for 10 years, and placed it on the table in front of him. "In that case, Ethan, let's end it here." He froze, as if he couldn't believe I was truly cutting things off. But his expression quickly hardened, his tone lowering with a hint of warning. "You should think carefully. If you walk out of here today, the relationship between the Parker family and the Sterling family will be over too." I stopped and turned back, his face relaxed slightly. "As long as you can accept Lily," he said, "I promise the alliance between our families will remain intact." "Ethan Parker," I cut him off firmly, my voice steady. "I don't think you've ever really understood me. I watched my mother endure humiliation after humiliation in the name of love, only to be repaid with betrayal after betrayal by my father. That's when I learned endless forgiveness never earns kindness, it only invites more cruelty. And I will never let myself fall into that same trap." The moment I left the hotel, I went straight back to the company without stopping anywhere else. At a time like this, there was no room for personal emotions. I barely allowed myself a second to think. As soon as I stepped into my office, I instructed my assistant to contact the communications department and all executive members to arrange an emergency meeting. My sudden withdrawal from the wedding was, in effect, a silent declaration of the collapse of the alliance between our two families. In such circumstances, I needed to act fast, to contain the brewing public relations crisis, and to maintain investor confidence amid the inevitable upheaval. Still wearing my untouched wedding gown, I sat in my office under the white glow of the desk lamp. The light spilled across the hem of my dress. My body was exhausted, but my mind was sharper than ever. Ethan Parker, the most sought-after heir in the business world, was always a name the media loved to chase. What had happened at the wedding today would never stay a secret. I could already imagine the sensational headlines flooding social media by morning. Instead of sitting back and letting public outrage explode, I decided to take control, to turn the chaos into an advantage and redirect the attention towards Sterling Corporation. Still in my wedding dress, I spent the entire night meeting with the company's senior executives, formulating a precise communication strategy. Before dawn even broke, I summoned the PR and image consulting teams to prepare for my public appearance. Every detail had to be perfect, leaving no room for mistakes. By the next morning, news of the canceled wedding and the rumored fallout between Ethan Parker and me had taken over the top trending searches. The Parker Group tried to suppress the story by releasing gossip about two of their signed celebrities, hoping to divert attention. But with Ethan's prominence and the public's endless fascination with high society scandals, nothing could cool the fire. Just as speculation about the reason for the breakup was reaching its peak, a series of intimate photos of Ethan and Lily, his stand-in for Emily Chen over the past year, began spreading across the internet. Those photos had been prepared and released by my team at the perfect moment. At the same time, new rumors emerged claiming that I, heartbroken and defeated, had left the country. Old stories began to resurface. The story of my turbulent relationship with Ethan Parker resurfaced at the perfect time. People began speculating that the love we once believed could save us both had ultimately been defeated by time. In that climate, the Parker Group had no choice but to release an official statement, declaring that both sides had amicably parted ways. But the public wasn't convinced. If the relationship had been genuine, why would we have waited until our wedding day to break up? Sitting in the VIP lounge at the airport, I took a slow sip of coffee, glanced at my phone screen, and calmly hit the like button on a few sarcastic comments about that announcement. A few minutes later, my team released a short video, footage capturing the heated argument between Ethan and me during the wedding ceremony. The internet exploded. Soon the story of how my mother had been driven to mental collapse by my biological father and Emily Chen's mother, Helen Zhao, resurfaced as well. Outrage flooded the comments. "Oh my God, watching this makes me want to punch a wall," one user wrote. "If my mother had been killed and everything that belonged to me was stolen by some illegitimate child, I'd make sure no one in that family ever knew peace again." Others began digging up old photos of Emily flaunting her expensive jewelry and comparing them to pictures of me in my teenage years, wearing a faded school uniform with secondhand shoes. "Someone like her dares to ask Nina to forgive her. Where's her conscience?" another wrote. A few people were gentler, leaving comments like, "The dead deserve respect. Let's not add fuel to the fire." I didn't reply. I simply stood up and left quietly. Around that same time, I used my personal account to post a brief message. "The relationship is over. Work is what matters now." The official Sterling Corporation account immediately reshared it, attaching a photo of me at the airport along with a clear caption. "Ms. Nina Sterling's trip abroad is for a meeting with the lead designer of Sterling's upcoming women's fashion line. This has nothing to do with her personal life." The photo spread rapidly across every platform. In it, I wore a fitted white t-shirt tucked into wide-leg slacks. My long wavy hair was loosely tied back, simple yet refined. With the help of my professional styling team, my appearance exuded calm confidence, elegant, poised, and nothing like a woman fresh out of heartbreak. Her aura is unreal. That power suit was made for her. I love how she's all about her career, absolutely inspiring. By the time my flight landed, Sterling Corporation had already climbed to the top of every trending search list. The clothes I'd worn in that photo became instant bestsellers, especially pieces from the high-end women's line renowned for its fine materials, comfort, and focus on independence and self-worth over romantic illusions. The public's reaction not only aligned perfectly with the spirit of the brand I had been building, but also generated a media wave far beyond expectations. This sequence of actions didn't just stabilize the company's image, it propelled Sterling's women's fashion division into the spotlight. breaking through long-standing market barriers and drawing powerful attention in an intensely competitive industry. It wasn't merely a crisis management strategy, it was a reflection of the principle I had always lived by: don't wait to be attacked, strike first. Still, I never saw it as just a way to handle the fallout of a broken alliance. What I truly aimed for was to rebuild investor confidence in Sterling's ongoing projects. Though the women's fashion division had always been a secondary branch, its explosive growth and profit surge now served as an undeniable statement, one that not only reassured our partners but also proved something far greater. I, Nina Sterling, was not someone easily broken. The substantial revenue generated from this line became the foundation. The profits from the new product line quickly improved our cash flow, reinforcing the stability of Sterling Corporation's entire business ecosystem. Most importantly, the public began to see something clearly. Even without Ethan Parker's shadow, Nina Sterling could still stand tall, strong, and unshaken amid the storm. What once seemed like a devastating crisis had turned into a marketing triumph beyond all expectations. Only when the pressure finally eased did I realize how far I'd pushed myself. The price I paid was a prolonged illness that left me utterly drained. Memories of the years I had spent side by side with Ethan, every moment we had shared through hardship and darkness, now felt like cold, invisible blades twisting quietly inside me. Well, a familiar teasing voice said. I thought you were too strong to care anymore. And now look at you, brought down by Ethan Parker of all people. When I woke up in a villa in Tuscany, the woman sitting next to my bed was none other than Clara Zhang, someone I had clashed with more than once. She was peeling an apple, a mocking smile tugging at her lips. I took the apple from her hand calmly, showing no reaction. We were together for 10 years, I said softly. That's not something you just shrug off in a few days. I narrowed my eyes slightly, a hint of amusement in my tone. Besides, weren't you once interested in Ethan yourself? Clara's face darkened instantly. She waved her hand, as if trying to erase that part of the past. Don't remind me, she groaned. Just thinking about how I used to fight with you every day over that useless man makes me want to go back in time and strangle my younger self. Her gaze softened slightly, losing its earlier sarcasm. Honestly, I thought after what happened with Emily Chen, you'd never forgive him again. Betrayal leaves cracks that never really heal. Back then, when Emily took her own life, Ethan had shamelessly used every connection he had to get Helen Zhao, Emily's mother, released from the psychiatric facility. But I had struck first. I took advantage of a loophole during the transfer process and arranged for people from the Qian family to abduct Helen as payback. By the time Ethan managed to get her back, she was no longer herself, her mind shattered beyond repair. That incident became the spark that ignited the most violent argument Ethan and I had ever had. By nature, I was decisive, and under normal circumstances, I wouldn't have given him another chance. But then again, he was Ethan. We had grown up together, survived years of darkness side by side. We knew each other's pain better than anyone else. From confidants, we became lovers. From allies, we became each other's last refuge. Once, when I was severely injured and unconscious, he had crawled on his knees up the stone steps of an old mountain temple, begging for a talisman to protect me. His forehead was bleeding, pressed against my hand as he repeated in a trembling voice, Nina, please, don't leave me. I had once believed nothing could ever tear us apart. So when he came back, reaching out to me and begging for one last chance, I relented. And that was the final chance I would ever give him. This illness, to me, felt like a sudden storm, fierce, violent, but temporary. It would pass, leaving behind nothing but a chill in my chest. By the time I returned home, whatever flames had once burned between Ethan Parker and me had long gone cold. Though Sterling's new project was gaining momentum and the women's fashion line continued to generate strong revenue, the financial pressure was mounting. Some investors, fearing the influence of the Parker Group, began to pull out, leaving us strained for funds. As I was reviewing the new documents sent over by a private investigator, trying to plan my next move, Clara unexpectedly walked in. Ever thought about forming an alliance with the Zhang family? She asked bluntly, skipping all pleasantries. I frowned. You mean, with you? Clara coughed lightly, her hand pausing midair with the teacup still in her grasp. Then she nudged the young man sitting beside her with her elbow. "Go on," she said. "At home, you were a lot more confident, weren't you?" The young man's ears turned slightly red. He lifted his head, set his teacup carefully on the table, adjusted his posture, and sat up straight before looking me squarely in the eye. "Miss Sterling," he said earnestly, "my name is Kevin Zhang. I hope you'll consider marrying me." The moment the words left his mouth, his fair face turned crimson, as if he'd just been dunked in boiling water. Clara shot him a look full of exasperation, clearly unimpressed with her younger brother's performance. Then she turned to me. "If our families form an alliance, my family will cover the capital you're missing. Consider it an engagement gift for my brother." "An engagement gift?" I echoed, glancing at Kevin. Using it as an excuse, I motioned for my assistant to escort him out of the room. Only after he left did I turn back to Clara. "You're serious?" Her usual teasing expression softened into something steadier, more genuine. "Years ago," she began, "my father almost forced me to marry some old man just to boost his illegitimate son's position in the family. Even though you and I were on bad terms back then, you still helped me out of that situation. I owe you for that, Nina. And as for Kevin, he's had feelings for you for a long time." I raised an eyebrow. "Feelings? For me?" Clara shrugged lightly. "Ever since the day you took him along to rescue me, he's been fixated on you. For years now, he's kept up with every bit of news related to you. He even applied to the same university you went to. I know it sounds a little extreme, but he's my brother. I can't just ignore it." At that moment, a memory flashed through my mind. The first time I met Kevin Zhang. He had been wearing a school uniform then, still a high school student, if I remembered correctly. Judging by the timeline, he must still have been studying when that happened. "He just got his master's degree this year," Clara said, catching my expression. "Don't worry, he's legally old enough to get married." That afternoon, after work, as I stepped out of the Sterling building, I saw Kevin crouched by the flower beds outside. He was wearing a simple black hoodie, his tall, slender frame, almost 6'2", impossible to overlook, even in such an unassuming pose. His face was delicate and clean-cut, his expression both quiet and sincere. The moment his eyes met mine, his entire face seemed to light up. In an instant, the cold air around him softened, his gaze shifting from that of a wary wolf to the gentle, loyal eyes of a golden retriever waiting for its owner. "You're done with work already?" he asked, walking toward me, his long lashes lowering slightly. Knowing exactly what was going through his mind, I couldn't resist teasing him. "What are you doing here?" He scratched the back of his neck awkwardly. "My sister said I shouldn't come home until I've handled this marriage thing." The wind blew through his hair, making him look even more pitiful, and somehow I found the sight amusing. I chuckled lightly. "Are you always this shy?" As I spoke, I reached out and brushed aside a loose strand of hair that had fallen across his forehead. "But just so you know," I added with a hint of playfulness, "I'm not the type to fall for tricks like that." Kevin looked up, startled, as if realizing he might have been acting too forward. When he dropped his gaze again, guilt flashed across his face, so palpable it almost made him shrink in on himself. Before he could spiral into self-reproach, I took the initiative and grabbed his hand. "Come on," I said with a faint smile. "Let's go. You should at least see where I live before we talk about anything serious." His eyes widened in disbelief as I led him away. On the table at home later that evening sat 2 documents, an investment contract from the Zhang family and a prenuptial agreement. According to the terms, the Zhang's capital investment into Sterling's new project would be converted into shares under Kevin Zhang's name. After the lawyer finished explaining the property clauses, he moved on to the next section, agreements regarding our married life and potential children. The terms were simple, without unnecessary embellishment. Both parties would marry of their own free will, without coercion, without excessive constraints. And if, during the marriage, the 2 of us were unable to develop genuine affection, then either of us would have the right to end the marriage at any time. During that period, if we had a child, and that child was our only one, then the child would take my last name. Should we decide to divorce, The man would voluntarily give up custody, and I, as the mother, would not invoke any reason to demand further responsibility or support from him. That was the clear boundary I set for this arrangement. After all, my family still ran a corporation that required an heir. I knew these terms might be difficult for some to accept. When Kevin Jiang sat there listening to everything, his expression went blank, like someone hit by a sudden gust of wind. Once the lawyer finished reading through the clauses, I didn't bother with polite pretense. "Sterling Corporation needs a successor," I said plainly. "If you can't agree to these conditions, I can use medical assistance to have a child." No, that's not it," Kevin interrupted hastily, shaking his head. "It's not that I disagree, His eyes darted toward the lawyer, his face flushing bright red all the way to his ears. Then, barely audible, he murmured, "I was just thinking what we should name our kid." The corner of his lips lifted unconsciously, a shy grin tugging at them. I could almost hear Clara's voice in my head saying her brother was hopelessly romantic, so idealistic that it bordered on delusion. But looking at him now, I had to admit there was something endearing about it. Once all the documents and agreements were signed, that evening, Clara Zhang appeared in an interview, publicly announcing the alliance between the Sterling and Zhang families and the expansion of their business cooperation. The good news was that both Sterling's and Zhang Group's stock prices immediately surged. The not-so-good news was that, because Kevin rarely appeared in public while Clara and I had been photographed together multiple times in the past, including that incident years ago when I saved her in the middle of a crowded street, the internet decided to get creative. As soon as news of our family's partnership broke, social media exploded with shipping theories, except they weren't pairing me with Kevin. They were shipping me with Clara. I didn't think much of it until my assistant nervously informed me that a couple edit video featuring me and Kevin had just skyrocketed to the top of the trending chart. After graduating, Kevin had opened his own small gaming studio and developed 2 indie games praised for both their creativity and storytelling. So when I noticed the logo, Little Bai, the mascot of his studio, used as the profile icon of the account that had uploaded the video, everything clicked. No wonder he'd been glued to his laptop for the past 2 days without saying a word. I hadn't expected him to care that much. Smiling to myself, I logged into my personal social media account and hit the like button on the video. Seconds later, a notification popped up. "Little Bai Studio has followed you." I lowered my head and chuckled quietly. My assistant, standing nearby, looked utterly confused, but I didn't explain. Instead, I stood up calmly and walked into the conference room. The meeting dragged on until late evening. By the time I wrapped up and returned home, it was nearly 10 o'clock at night. The moment I opened the door, the sight before me made me pause. Ethan Parker and Kevin Jiang were sitting opposite each other on the sofa, their gazes locked like 2 predators ready to strike. The air between them was thick with tension. As soon as they noticed me, both men stood up at once. "Nina," they said simultaneously. Their voices overlapped, and the awkward silence that followed was almost comical. They both froze, eyeing each other warily before turning their gazes back toward me, each with the same wounded, possessive expression. Keeping my face composed, I stepped forward until I stood right in front of Kevin. I wasn't sure what he was imagining, but his eyes suddenly filled with something tender and almost heartbreaking. Meanwhile, Ethan's expression carried an unmistakable hint of smug satisfaction. I frowned and spoke in a firm tone. "Kevin Jiang, why did you let a stranger into the house without permission?" At that, Kevin blinked, momentarily stunned. Kevin's eyes lit up suddenly. Trying to hold back a smile, he tugged gently on my sleeve and hurried to explain, "It wasn't me who let him in. He opened the door himself." That was when I remembered Ethan Parker still had a spare key to my house. I lifted my gaze toward him, my expression cold and composed, then turned to Kevin. "Next time something like this happens, call the police immediately. I don't like strangers walking in and out of my home." Ethan's face darkened instantly. "Nina Sterling," he hissed through gritted teeth. Kevin immediately stepped forward, placing himself in front of me as if afraid Ethan might hurt me. I didn't back down. My eyes locked on Ethan's, my voice steady and firm. "Ethan, this place isn't yours. Don't ever come here again." His eyes flicked over me, then landed on Kevin. His fists clenched, then slowly loosened as he exhaled sharply. Fine. Very good, Nina, he spat before turning away, his steps heavy with suppressed fury. I watched him walk off, his shoulders stiff, his anger barely contained. Letting out a quiet sigh, I turned to Kevin. Tomorrow, make sure to call someone to change the locks. Kevin nodded obediently, then gazed at me for a long moment as if debating something. Before I could react, he suddenly wrapped his arms tightly around me, holding on as though he was afraid I might disappear. I, Kevin Zhang, swear, he murmured with quiet determination, that I will never betray you, Nina. I stood still, not saying a word. Then, almost by instinct, I raised my arms and gently returned the embrace, not too tightly, but enough for him to know I didn't reject it. I had to admit, the energy of youth was something else entirely. Normally, I struggled to sleep, but that night I drifted off almost instantly, sleeping straight through until noon, no dreams, no waking up midway. It was Saturday. I took my time eating breakfast, which Kevin had prepared early that morning, before driving him back to his game studio. On the way home, out of habit, I stopped by my usual flower shop, picked out a simple bouquet, and drove straight to the cemetery to visit my mother. But what I didn't expect was to see Ethan Parker standing there in front of her grave. Ever since Emily Chen's death, he hadn't shown up here once. I approached slowly, the fresh flowers still in my hand. Our eyes met briefly across a few rows of gravestones, neither of us speaking. I said nothing, and walked straight past him, kneeling down to place my bouquet before my mother's headstone, just as I always did. Nina, he finally said, his voice hesitant, as if searching for the right words. Are you really going to marry that Zhang boy? I turned around, letting my gaze sweep over him from head to toe, and then let out a soft, mocking laugh. And what does that have to do with you? Without waiting for his reply, I bent down, picked up the bouquet he had placed before the grave, walked calmly to the nearby trash bin, and tossed it in without a moment's hesitation. Nina? He exclaimed in shock, rushing forward to grab my wrist, as though terrified I might vanish again. What are you doing? I pulled my hand free, my eyes emotionless. The question is, I said coolly, what exactly are you trying to do? Before he could answer, I raised my hand and slapped him hard across the face. You just hit me? He stammered, pressing a hand to his cheek, staring at me in disbelief. That slap, I said icily, is one I should have given you a long time ago, on the day you turned our wedding into a farce and called it love. My voice was steady, cutting. Did you really think that after everything you did, ruining the ceremony, sabotaging my project, stirring up chaos again and again, I could just pretend none of it ever happened and go back to treating you like before? Ethan froze where he stood, as if rooted to the ground, while I looked at him and let out a faint, contemptuous laugh. I know exactly what's going through your mind, Ethan Parker, I said, but don't fool yourself into thinking you matter that much. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, speechless. Because I knew one thing for certain, men like him never truly wanted to end things. They just wanted me to bow my head. He wanted to use me to ease the guilt that had been eating away at him over Emily Chen's death. He knew me well enough to understand that I wasn't someone who trusted easily, that I had grown up with a deep-rooted skepticism toward relationships. Other than him, the boy I'd grown up beside, there had hardly been anyone who could make me let down my guard. But what he never understood was that I had never considered love to be essential. And I would never again allow anyone, even him, to use the word love as an excuse to hurt me. My wedding to Kevin Zhang was a grand affair, so extravagant it practically threw the entire city into chaos. Maybe out of solidarity or just to make a statement, Clara Zhang spared no expense, buying out every major advertising space in the city to broadcast congratulations for our marriage. Right before the ceremony began, Kevin excitedly showed off a drone performance he had directed himself. And not only that, he had also produced a cinematic opening video for the wedding, laughing as he told me, "This time I'm going to make it to the top of the hot search, finally ahead of my sister." His employees at the studio, of course, couldn't resist teasing him. Looks like the boss finally found a real-life use for all those game trailer skills. Clara, standing nearby, pretended not to care, but I caught her discreetly uploading Kevin's wedding video to one of the major advertising networks. Within minutes, it was trending at the top of every platform. If Kevin hadn't understood before, he certainly did now. Money could, in fact, define everything. When Kevin saw the flood of comments praising us as the perfect couple, he ran over to me beaming with pride, eyes bright like the afternoon sun. "Look at this. Even the internet thinks we're a match made in heaven." Right then, the photographers called for a family photo. Clara clicked her tongue, half joking, half serious. "Well, this is something I never thought I'd see. Who'd have guessed we'd end up as in-laws?" Kevin straightened his posture, trying to look serious, though the sparkle of childish delight in his eyes completely betrayed him. Everything was going smoothly, until Ethan Parker showed up out of nowhere. My gaze immediately swept toward the Zhang siblings. "Did either of you invite him?" Kevin shook his head quickly, waving his hands. "No." Clara's tone was firmer. "Of course not. Should I have someone escort him out?" I glanced around the venue. The press was already lurking in the corners, waiting for any slip-up to feed their headlines. The last thing I wanted was to let my wedding turn into another public spectacle. Some things I realized needed to be settled once and for all, but privately. "Take him to the lounge behind the stage," I told my assistant. A few minutes later, I entered the room. Still in my wedding gown, I crossed my arms and sat on the sofa, my tone calm but cool. "So, Ethan," I said, "what trick are you planning to pull today?" He stood there silently for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the wedding dress as if frozen by some thought he couldn't voice. Only when he noticed Kevin standing beside me did his expression harden, irritation flashing clearly in his eyes. "I want to talk to you alone," he said flatly. Kevin turned to look at me, uncertainty flickering across his face, but he respected my choice. Just as he was about to step out, I reached for his hand, stopping him. "There's no need," I said firmly. "Whatever's between us, he has every right to know." Kevin looked at me as if he had just won the lottery, his eyes lighting up, his expression glowing with pride, like a loyal dog who'd just been praised by its owner. He even tilted his chin slightly in Ethan's direction, as though daring him to try anything. And under my startled gaze, Kevin pulled a small red booklet from the inside pocket of his suit jacket and flipped it open right in front of Ethan, his face glowing with unrestrained pride. For a second I froze. Who in the world carried their marriage certificate around with them? But when I saw Kevin's boyish grin, so bright, so innocent, I couldn't bring myself to scold him. Strangely enough, even in that absurd moment, I found him both ridiculous and endearingly sweet. Turning back to Ethan, I said plainly, "You see it now, don't you? Kevin Zhang and I are legally married. So if you've got something to say it quickly. Otherwise, please leave." Ethan stood there, stunned. His eyes locked on the photo inside the marriage certificate. His lips trembled as he muttered, "How is this possible? You really married someone else?" Kevin calmly closed the booklet and slipped it back into his pocket, completely unfazed by Ethan's expression, which was twisting with disbelief. "Let's get one thing straight," Kevin said evenly. "I didn't just marry someone. I married Nina." Ethan's head snapped up, his gaze sharp and conflicted. "You did this on purpose, didn't you?" he demanded. "You wanted to provoke me. You know I never truly wanted to break up with you." I cut him off coldly. "Ethan, you've always acted like the world revolves around you. Who do you think you are, that I should shape my life around your moods? After everything you've done, do you really believe I'd ever go back to you?" "But you promised me," he said hoarsely, desperation creeping into his tone. "When you were 17, you promised you'd only marry me. You said, and you," I interrupted, my voice like ice, "once swore you'd never betray me. So tell me, how did that turn out?" "The truth is, you fell for Emily Chen, didn't you?" "No," he protested, shaking his head. "I didn't love her, I just couldn't let go of your guilt toward her. I finished for him. And you couldn't stand the fact that you couldn't control me. So you used that guilt as an excuse to keep me under your thumb, didn't you?" I met his eyes without flinching. "I know exactly what kind of man you are, Ethan. You may not admit it, but you did have feelings for Emily. And the way you tried to use that to suppress me, to make me bend, was just as real." "Nina, he started, but I didn't let him finish. "I've had enough." My tone was calm, but the edge in it was sharp as glass. While I was undergoing treatment abroad, I had plenty of time to think. You're a calculating man. Everything you do is deliberate. So tell me, what was that wedding scene you caused? All that chaos, that humiliation, was it really just for a dead woman? My gaze hardened, and I spoke each word clearly. The truth is, you were already unhappy with me long before Emily died. Because I refused to obey you. Because I launched a project that competed directly with Parker Group. Because I wouldn't give up 5% of my company's shares to your side. Because I wanted our future child to carry my family name and inherit Sterling Corporation. That's why you let Emily linger around you. You wanted to use her, to pressure me, to make me depend on you, to force me into compromise. Isn't that right? That's not true, Ethan said quickly, his voice rising defensively. But I didn't give him the chance to say more. I nodded to my assistant, who stepped forward and placed a thick folder of documents on the table between us. While I was recovering in Tuscany, I hadn't spent my days wallowing in pain or nostalgia. I had been quietly, ruthlessly working. I knew Ethan Parker wasn't a man easily swayed by emotion. He wasn't the type to let feelings cloud his judgment. And precisely because I understood that about him, I had spared no expense hiring the best private investigation team money could buy to dig deep into every link between him and Emily Chen. After months of careful investigation, the truth came to light. From the very moment my father was arrested and I was forced to take over Sterling Corporation, Ethan had already re-established contact with Emily Chen. I'll admit, my father's moral compass had long since collapsed, but he had still been the one who controlled Sterling for many years. My father still held significant assets. Even after his downfall, he remained a figure that the business world treaded carefully around. And as his legal heir, Emily Chen followed Ethan Parker's every instruction without question. She had been his pawn, a piece he had strategically placed inside Sterling Corporation long before, intending to use her as leverage against me when the time was right. What he didn't anticipate was that Emily would truly fall for him, or that she would actually become terminally ill. So whether it was a twinge of personal guilt or a calculated attempt to tighten his grip on me, Ethan later arranged for Emily's mother, Helen Zhao, who was also one of my father's legal heirs, to be quietly released from the care facility. But what he didn't expect was that I wouldn't sit still and let him manipulate the game any further. I acted swiftly, using the Qian family's influence to take Helen Zhao out of play entirely. As for Lily Moore, the woman Ethan had pushed into Emily's former role in his carefully crafted emotional narrative, she was, in truth, another illegitimate child of my father. A bitter laugh escaped me as I pulled a stack of photos from my folder and tossed them on the table. They showed Ethan visiting my father in prison, hiring men to conduct a secret DNA test between Lily and my father, and later trying to convince him to transfer part of his shares to her. After that, I said coldly, you staged an elaborate spectacle at our wedding, just to publicly announce Lily's existence. Your plan was simple but effective. You knew I wouldn't risk making a scene that could jeopardize Sterling's new project. You expected me to swallow my pride, stay composed for the sake of our investors and partners, and in doing so, lose credibility in front of the entire board. You wanted to parade Lily in front of everyone to make sure the world saw who stood behind her, the Parker Group. And then, after the wedding, you intended to submit the share transfer documents, allowing her to officially join Sterling's board of directors. I paused, my voice calm but sharp as a blade, my eyes cold as they met his paling face. So tell me, Ethan, why didn't you go through with it? He stiffened, realization dawning too late. You hid Lily, he said slowly. I didn't deny it. The truth was obvious. Lily might have been my father's illegitimate daughter, but she was the result of a fleeting affair, someone he never truly cared for. She and her mother had no affection left for him. Had it not been for the desperate need to pay for her mother's medical treatment, Lily would never have agreed to take part in Ethan's scheme. But she wasn't foolish. She knew her limits. She wasn't built for power games or corporate warfare. All she wanted was a quiet life, a simple, peaceful existence with her mother, far away from all the manipulation and deceit. So when I offered her a deal, access to the best doctors, the finest medical treatment, and lifelong financial security abroad. She didn't hesitate. In exchange, she signed over every share my father had given her to me. I calmly took 2 documents from my folder, duplicates of the finalized transfer agreements, and placed them on the table, sliding them toward Ethan. His eyes scanned the first one, the agreement signed by Lily. Though his face tightened, he managed to keep his composure. But when his gaze moved to the second document, the shock was unmistakable. "Nina," he breathed, his voice barely more than a whisper. You transferred all your shares to Parker Group's vice president, Ryan Parker?" I met his stunned eyes without blinking. "Ethan, after all these years, I'd think you'd know me well enough by now. You should know better than anyone, Ethan. Sterling Corporation isn't a place where you can play your games." Even Kevin, standing beside me, stiffened at my words. Back then, to help Ethan Parker gain a firm foothold within Parker Group, I hadn't hesitated to mortgage the Sterling shares I owned, along with the Rose Manor that my grandmother had left me, all just to secure an additional 5% of Parker Group's stock for him. For years, during every shareholders' meeting, I had stood firmly on his side without a single moment of hesitation. Even when our relationship fell into silence and cold distance, I never once used my voting power against him. Everyone in the company naturally assumed that the voting rights from my 5% stake were effectively in his hands, and that was what allowed him to overpower his cousin, Ryan Parker, for so many years. Ryan, the son of Ethan's second uncle, controlled 24% of Parker Group's shares alongside his father. Ethan held 27%. But if my 5% were added to Ryan's side instead of his, the balance of power would immediately tip, and Ethan knew it. That's why he'd spent years trying to convince me to transfer my shares back to him, because deep down, he'd never truly trusted me. "Nina," he snapped, his voice trembling with rage, "what's the meaning of this? Have you completely lost your conscience?" He clenched the signed contract in his fist, his eyes burning red with a mix of fury and disbelief. "After everything we've been through, all these years, how could you be so cruel to me?" As his temper flared, Kevin instinctively stepped forward, positioning himself between us. That single movement was enough to set Ethan off even more. He lunged forward, shoving Kevin aside with force and raising his hand toward me. But his arm froze midair when his gaze fell on the back of my hand, where a faint but unmistakable scar ran across my skin. And before he could speak, I struck first. My palm connected sharply against his face, the sound echoing through the room like a whip. Ethan stood still, eyes wide, staring at the scar as if it had silenced him completely. His voice came out hoarse, almost breaking. "Nina?" I followed his gaze, then lifted my chin, my voice cold and steady. "Ethan Parker, don't act like I never suffered for you. I did. But you were the one who betrayed me first." I took a slow step closer, my tone low but cutting. "Back when your uncle had the Parker family under his thumb, you were cornered. Your life was hanging by a thread. I was the one who knelt before your enemies, who let them crush 2 of my fingers under their heel just to keep you alive." His body trembled, his voice thick with guilt. "Nina, I was wrong. I never should have let things get this far. I never loved Emily Chen, not truly. The only woman I've ever loved from beginning to end is you. I couldn't let go of her death. I only wanted you to be a little more obedient, to stop fighting me. I never wanted to lose you." "No, Ethan." I cut him off, my tone void of warmth. "The moment you shook hands with my father to corner me, you should have known this day would come. From that moment on, there was no turning back. And as for being the son-in-law of the Sterling family," I let out a faint, bitter laugh. "You were never worthy." Without another glance, I turned and walked out of the lounge with Kevin by my side. Over a year later, while I was abroad expanding Sterling's overseas operations, Clara John called me on a video call, her voice trembling with excitement. "Ever since you transferred that 5% to Ryan Parker," she said breathlessly, "he's been unstoppable. With that advantage, he started an all-out war against Ethan." "Ryan Parker really is his father's son," Clara Jang said over the video call, her voice taut with emotion. "He's just as ruthless. The moment he realized Ethan was buying back shares and rallying investors, he launched a full-blown counterattack. Word is, he even had Ethan kidnapped, forced him to sign a transfer of ownership." She paused for a moment, her tone softening before she added quietly, "It's a shame you weren't there this time. When they found him, one of his legs was completely ruined." I answered with nothing more than a calm, indifferent hum. On the other end, Clara went silent for a second, clearly caught off guard by my composure. Then, with a sigh heavy with sentiment, she said, "I'll never understand Ethan Parker. If he had just stayed by your side back then, none of this would have happened." I let out a faint laugh. Maybe he was never capable of truly trusting anyone. To him, everything and everyone was a transaction. I leaned back slightly, my voice quiet but steady. If I hadn't convinced Lily Moore to side with me when I did, even if I'd turned against him, his worst-case scenario would have just been to swap Sterling's shares from Lily's hands for the 5% I owned. Either way, his ultimate goal was always the same, to get those shares. And he would have found a way to do it, one way or another. Clara was silent for a long time, as though digesting my words. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a shiver of unease. "Thank God you didn't stay with him. A man who can calculate every move, even against the person who once saved his life. Someone like that makes my blood run cold." Then, with a faint, teasing sigh, she added, "Come to think of it, being with someone simple and genuine doesn't sound like such a bad choice after all." Just then, Kevin appeared at the doorway, still wearing his apron, holding our little daughter in his arms. Her name was Stella, our small bright star. He smiled, eyes crinkling as he called out, "Babe, dinner's ready." Hearing his voice, Clara chuckled through the phone. "Well, that's that. Next to this harmless goofball, those cold, calculating types suddenly don't seem so attractive anymore." There was a playful pause before she continued softly. "But tell me one thing, Nina. You once had an enormous fortune from selling your shares in Parker Group. You had enough resources to build an empire on your own. So why did you choose to marry my brother?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I smiled. Some questions didn't need explanations. I didn't want to dissect that fleeting moment years ago, whether it had been loneliness that made me waver, or a deliberate, strategic move on the chessboard of life. None of that mattered anymore. What mattered was that now, I knew exactly what I wanted, and I had the strength to walk the path I chose. I had learned to value love that came from sincerity, to return it in kind, and to take responsibility for every decision I made. I said a gentle goodbye to Clara, swiped away another unread message from Ethan Parker, and turned toward Kevin with a warm smile. "So," I asked, teasing lightly, "what's the special dish tonight, Chef Jang? Have you ever loved someone so much that you forgot you deserved better?" Love and Lies story. Top of form, bottom of form.